Today is story time with Rich Morrow. If you want to learn more about our 7-point process, head over to lumen.tv/institute and you can sign up there, check it out, see the online community, grow, and go deeper than beyond these podcasts into the weekly Q&As and even the one-on-one mentorship. We're here with Rich Morrow. Rich, we've known each other for a long time now. And it seems like ever since I've known you, you've been writing something. And so we're going to talk about story. I know that's passionate on your heart, and you've had quite the journey with some different stories you've written. And so I'm just going to open it up, let you run with it. And then maybe if we have time, then I do have a question or two.
Okay, sounds good.
So,
sorry, what?
Yeah, okay. Let's go.
So, yes, if you asked me what I'd like to talk about is story. That's really kind of where everything starts. It's kind of the foundation of filmmaking. It's been a very interesting journey. I'm realizing I'm been doing this for almost 30 years now. So I just,
wow,
it's kind of mind blowing at this point. Like, wow, really, it's been 30 years. I'm feeling my age quite a bit. But if I had to go back in time and tell myself what regarding filmmaking was most important, I would go back in time and tell myself, focus on story, focus on telling good stories. It's the foundation for the film. It's what's going to help you in the editing room. It's going to help you connect with your audiences. And I sad to say, when I started 30 years ago, that really, I heard it, but I didn't necessarily make it a priority. And for me, until I kind of accepted that kind of truth, my work improved exponentially. Being very clear. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of like maybe in the beginning too, you think you're accepting it.
Yes, exactly.
But then you realize oh man, story's a lot more than I thought it was.
It was of course I'm committed to story. Of course. I didn't really understand what that commitment meant. And now kind of looking back, I realize if you understand story and the art of story and the craft of story, you can tell pretty quickly by talking to somebody whether they understand that. And if they don't understand that, sadly, they're at a great disadvantage of succeeding. Storytelling, I'm realizing, it's important. It's pivotal. And you can learn the other positions and the other crafts of filmmaking, but understanding story makes you a better director. When shooting the film, it makes you a better director in helping the actors, because you understand what elements of the scene are very important to the story. It also makes you a better editor, understanding the just basic structures. And again, going back in time to my earlier self, I understand it's overwhelming. How do I get good at story? Just being committed to it, I would say, is understanding the story structures that are out there, understanding how to tell a good story, what elements have to be in a good story. We could cover that. Another interesting thing I would tell myself, which I didn't realize until I got older, was good storytelling is basically parables, if we had to relate it to the Bible. And I didn't understand that parables are basically stories that aren't about the characters created. They're about the audience. They're about the person listening to the parable. And Jesus knew this very well. And that's why he chose to speak in parables. And I think as a filmmaker, if you understand what a parable means, the movie's not about your characters. The movie's about the audience experience.
Gotcha.
And once you accept that, it changes the story the way you're telling it. So that was a big kind of light bulb moment for me.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, what is that parable? What does that mean? Well, think about it. Jesus was talking about shepherds, the sower of the seed, but he wasn't really talking about the sower of the seed.
Right.
He was talking about us. And people would leave that parable changed. They would hear the parable, and because it was so powerful, the parable, it affected them immediately. And I can't tell you, it is so gratifying as a writer, like when you write a story and people after the screening tell you that really changed my perspective, or that changed the way I feel about things, then you know you've created a parable.
Yeah.
So stories are basically parables, good stories. I'm not saying every film is a good story or every good story. They're basically just a parable where they're impacting the audience. And to do that is the other layer of storytelling. To do that, you have to be very, very good understanding of how to do that. And there are basic structures. I think Stan is a part of this Lumen Institute. He's very good at that and very committed to doing that. And until I kind of committed to that fundamentals of writing, it really, I don't know, I just could have been making stories just kind of, like you say, winging it.
Let's talk about Stan. So you're talking about Dr. Stan Williams, and he has the Moral Premise.
Correct.
His blog, moralpremise.com.
Which I have to thank you for introducing me to him.
Oh man, what a guy!
Yeah.
That guy, one of the best. I mean, he's you're right. He's incredible. Like we were saying before, just his feedback. It's like he'll punch you in the gut, but it only hurts because it's true.
It's true. That's the thing. Yeah. He's phenomenal, and like his courses are just, I would recommend them to anybody just because it helped me tremendously.
So how did you approach it? I mean, I know we used to bring him to film camp and stuff like that, but then you went deep.
I went deep. I went all in. I realized if I was going to be a good filmmaker, I needed to understand story. I was at the point of my life where I was like, I'm waiting for a great script to kind of just fall on my desk, or a great script to be presented to me. And I realized that that's not what God wanted. God wanted me to start writing my own things. And I'm grateful that he did push me to do so, because now I feel much more free to create what I want in a very professional way. I would say before understanding story fundamentals, I wasn't writing things professionally. I was just writing things the way they felt good. And I'd be honest with you, the saddest thing in the Catholic and Christian film market is I see so many talented writer and directors just writing what feels good. So it hits some of the notes, but it doesn't hit all the notes it needs. So it's kind of like, well, that was kind of good, but it's really not hitting where it could be. And it's so disheartening, because there's so much talent there, and they just don't realize they're just not following the instructions. And if they had just followed the instructions, their stories would have more of a parable effect on its audience. It's not rocket scientry. It's just basic things that the film medium has learned has works. And when you apply those notes, they just work. And I'm not saying cliche notes. I'm saying just understanding the notes allows you to deviate from the notes.
It's kind of like you're saying, like the beats, or the 3-act structure.
If you understand that very well, you can deviate it in an experimental way that makes it different and new. But most people, even in the secular film industry, don't even understand that, or maybe they don't have an appreciation for it. But it's reflected in the end product. It's just sad because, like I said, it's not rocket science, or it's not something that can't.
You know,
It's not something that can be.
I wonder if it has something to do with like just the artist in general. Like I think it was Picasso. He said something about like you got to learn the rules, and then you can break them.
Exactly.
But as artists, we're just like we just want to go right into breaking them.
Right. And I'm guilty. I mean, I totally did that on probably the first half of my career. I did that and managed to gain some success, but not. I wasn't a really good storyteller. I was just winging it. I was just feeling it out. And my better potential came when I understood the rules. And they're good rules. They're like fantastic. I always share with my sons the tricks. They're just great little tricks, and they just work. They work every time. It's amazing.
Is there a story or a project that you really dug in with this and helped you explore?
It's interesting because a couple of years ago, actually, with Lumen, like film camp, Pirates of Sunrise, that film, Pirates of Sunrise, we started to really, I encouraged everybody in that semester to apply these principles. And that was like the first time I saw like, oh, wow, if you just apply these principles, it really helps the story move along. It keeps the audience interested. So I didn't do the full press, but that was the first time I really was committed to the structure, committed to the beats, committed to the reversals, committed to the ticking clocks and all the things that make screenwriting fun to write. And I left that screening and I'm like, wow, even though we only shot that thing in a week, I think we only took a week to shoot it.
Right.
And it was a great shoot. It's one of my favorite years, actually. I was like, wow, that stuff kind of worked, even though there was, we shot in a week and we didn't have any budget, the story still worked with the audience. The audience enjoyed that story. And then it was that kind of after that, I was talking to my sons because they had written that particular thing and they followed it. I said, we probably could do a lot better, like with the rules. And then from there, we've written a few scripts together, mostly them on their own. And they wrote the most recent script, A Great Day, which is by the book, by the numbers, as far as screenwriting, structure, beats, all that. And I'm just blown away, like how well something can be written just by following the rules.
So when you were writing, or they were writing whatever, that The Great Day, was there moments you're like, this is what it says to do. It seems like it's going to work. I really hope it's going to work. Like that, that sort of, that moment of like, okay, I'm moving forward in trust. I know this is what I'm supposed to do. Is it going to pan out?
Well, I think that's what the rules kind of help get it done, because it gives you kind of a spine of what you need to do. It just it's going to work. It's like, well, if I put a reversal, here, it's going to move the story along. Those are just basic fundamentals. So if you've written something and you're like, oh, it's not working here, you can go right back to the rule and like, okay, maybe we should put a reversal here to kind of keep the momentum going. And that will change usually the dynamic and the momentum of the film. And just like where you had writer's block, all of a sudden you don't have writer's block because you just stuck to what works.
So knowing story structure, really understanding it, that's important. Then what else?
Well, just, embracing critique.
Mm.
I find it fascinating. I was working with someone who's a playwright, and um, I read the script and I was like, wow, this is pretty good, but it's not. It needs some help. It really needs like some good critique. And the person had informed me, like, in the playwriting industry, you're not supposed to critique the script. I didn't critique it. I said, oh, well, there's probably some fine tuning could be done here, like very politely. And the person goes, oh, in the theater community, you don't critique the screenplay. So I was like, okay. I knew that was kind of a disaster ready to happen, because I think you were at the Christian Worldview Festival with me, and I don't know if you remember when the Kendrick brothers were like, one of their core values was embracing critique. And it's probably why they've gotten so far on so little, is they understood the value of that. I would say embracing critique, as painful as it is, to embrace it, there's a reason that person is seeing it that way, and you need to understand as the writer why they see it that way, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess it goes back to what you were saying earlier, is the idea of the parable is about the audience,
right,
not the characters. And it's true. If the character may be portraying exactly what needs to be portrayed for whatever the story, but if your audience doesn't understand it, then what's the point?
There's no effect on them, because filmmaking is an illusion. I constantly joke with my son Luke that every moment of the writing and the editing, you're constantly trying to always allure the audience into your movie. It's like a magic. You're seducing them. You're seducing them without them knowing that you're seducing them. And you're using the fundamentals of screenwriting and the understanding that it's a parable, that the audience is always right. The audience is always right. Even if you don't want to hear it, the audience is always right. So I usually try to just, there was another great screenwriter. It said, he's like, the sign of a true professional is somebody that's not personally affected by critique. And this is a professional screenwriter. He's like, they don't they don't take it personally. And I know that's hard. It's hard, Just to give you an example, both my sons are really good writers, and they wrote a screenplay before this last one called Saving Grace. And no one really liked it. I mean, it had the fundamentals in it. You know what I mean? It had, like, as an example, it had all the fundamentals in it. It had reversals, it had ticking clocks, it had primal stakes, all things that make a good story. And everyone was kind of like, it's okay. And that was critique, you know what I mean? And nobody was really giving us specifics about what was wrong with it, because there was nothing wrong with it. It had the fundamentals. But it wasn't captivating the audience's imagination enough. And I just said to him, I go, there's just no reason to proceed with this as far as producing it. And it was very painful to accept. I think that script was like 21 pages. It was a well-written script. It's still a well-written script. I still think it's a well-written story, but it just didn't connect with readers enough to merit it to be made, if that makes sense. And
yeah, it's almost like if once they start critiquing, you're onto something. Like if the critique is, like you said, if it's like, well, yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, they didn't have any criticism on way it was executed, because I thought it was I actually thought the script was executed quite well. They just were not connecting with what the parable was saying. And they couldn't explain why, because it was done well, you know what I mean? It was written well, but they just didn't they didn't hate it. It's not like they hated it. They just, like, it's okay, and if it's at okay and they're not, there's something not working, then you have to just embrace it. And it was painful to move on to another screenplay, but they did, and they wound up getting a much better story.
Yeah.
With the newer script, people responded right away. They were like, this is just absolutely fantastic. They're just like, And that's like I was telling another writer a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, you want to get that initial response right away. That means kind of there's a good idea there. And
Yeah.
if you fix it now, you don't have to fix it in the editing room. Because we did, it's not like it's not like they wrote the script and it was perfect. But the initial response was so positive. Then we had to kind of hammer out, okay, what's the imperfections? And the more recent film, A Great Day, went through like, I think at least over 30 drafts. And that was because we didn't want to be in the editing room and say, oh, I wish we had done that in pre-production. I wish we had figured that out in pre-production.
Right.
And even with all the work that we put on it, we did wind up cutting out the first 2 scenes of the movie.
It's easier to take it out.
It is, than having to
put something that's not there.
Exactly. Well, that was the key thing. The goal is to get everything you need for the story to work emotionally. I will say 2 things, I had to accept about story. Story is about, aside from it being about the audience, it has to have 2 things. It has to have emotional impact on the audience, and it's about character transformation. The character has to change. The audience has to feel that change. If your film is lacking, and it's just like, it's okay. People are like, it's okay.
Yeah.
When people get excited about film, they've had an emotional experience from the film, and it's not mystical. Like I used to think it was more mystical. Like, oh well, that just all comes together, and it's just beautiful chemistry, artistry, and it's not. It's actually by design. If you actually understand how to create that, it's it works. I mean, and be honest with you, all the top filmmakers in the industry, they know how to do it very well, and that's why they get paid very well to do it, because they understand how to do that over and over.
So somebody's working on a project, or they're trying to get their story together. How would you say, where's a good starting point? I've
worked on this one project for like over 10 years, the Colby story.
That's right.
And I've wanted to burn it every time, because it's just so painful. But that's part of making really good story, is driving yourself through the pain. So one of the things I had to embrace was critique. I took everyone's criticism very, very seriously, and I fine-tuned it, and you keep adjusting, and then the film just gets better and better. One thing I would say is like, embrace critique, and then you're like, well, am I embracing the critique? If you keep perfecting your screenplay, you will eventually succeed. It's just period. So how does one do that? Someone's working on the film. It's like, well, for me, I kept submitting it to screenwriting contests, or they do like analysis. You can pay for it online, but there's a lot of them.
That's right.
There's very reasonable price ones. So I would get the feedback, and then I would tailor the script based on that feedback, and then feedback would just improve. I mean, feedback would just get better and better and better, and eventually it just got to a point. And that also told me that I was embracing criticism, by the way. As it got better and better, the critics had less and less to complain about it. And then after, getting good analysis from those screenwriting format places, I then put it in festivals, screenwriting festivals. And some of them were very, very generous in giving responses. And then I just honed it more and more and more based on those criticisms. And then eventually it started to win, or like when I say a win, it's more like those contests are very difficult to win. But if you're like a semi-finalist, like in a screenplay contest, your content is doing a good job. Like, it's connecting. And that was another thing another writer is like it said on a forum like this. It said, if you're constantly winning like the semifinal, like you're always a semifinalist, no matter what contest you put it into, you're connecting. Your screenplay is good. You don't necessarily have to win the screenplay contest, but and then that's what just happened eventually. Like It just would be a semi-finalist no matter what contest I put in. Or if it wasn't a semi-finalist, I would get I'd be like a quarter finalist with a very polite letter saying the screenplay was excellent. It's just, we had 8,000 submissions, like type of thing. But I would get that, you know what I mean? I would get that courtesy that it wasn't.
What was it about that script that made you start?
Was just kind of the story idea. I liked the idea of a Catholic priest being in the Auschwitz. I thought it had a irony to it that God's grace was very prevalent in like the worst place in the world. I thought audiences would find that interesting, and that's what drove me to. And then as I learned more about St. Maximilian Kolbe, I was like, this is a great story. I don't understand why nobody's done this.
Yeah.
So that's what drove me.
It changed so much.
It did, because
over the years
I embraced the criticism.
Yeah.
And if I had not embraced the criticism, it never would have achieved what it's achieved today.
Do you think part of embracing criticism is like kind of the fear that your original idea will just, it'll be gone, it'll dissipate?
My original idea did dissipate, and that's part of the search artistically. You have to go. It was a huge risk when I, changed the main character,
yeah,
and everybody was against it. And I was the only one that felt like, and actually, I think Stan Williams was the one who like suggested it indirectly.
Right.
And I'm like, I think it's a brilliant idea. I think even though it's going to be painful, it's going to be painful to change a story. I thought it was a brilliant idea. And I just felt good about it. And even though nobody was encouraging, and then it took a lot of like embracing critique and developing it and getting it to a point where people are like, wow, this is a really powerful story. It never would have been a powerful story if I did not embrace the audience's response, if that makes sense. Because that's all.
Did you find more depth in the meaning of what you were originally trying to say?
No. Ironically, if I was honest about it, I would say it still had the same depth. It just wasn't connecting with the audience in the way I would have liked them to connect it, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I had centered this story around St. Maximilian Kolbe initially with the same depth, the same power, but I wasn't engaging my audience. I was just showing my audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I was showing my audience a portrait, and I wasn't pulling them into the portrait.
That's a good way to say it.
Well, visually, I just think that's kind of what a good story does. It pulls you in. You get sucked into it. That's why you'll watch it over and over, because every time it will suck you in.
It's kind of interesting because you're not just trying to make any normal film. You're trying to do something that, like you said, is impactful. Well, it's not just like a comedy or just whatever, cotton candy sort of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I've kind of reached the point in my life. You devote, this better than anybody, Brian. Like, you devote years of your life into a project. Years, like a marriage. Like, if it's not going to have any impact on the audience, I mean, what's the point?
What's the point?
What's the point? So I one thing with my sons specifically, like when they're fighting me about putting thousands of hours in it, I go, this is your last chance. I go, once you show it, it's over. You can't go back. You can't really fix it. I mean, it's like, this is your one shot. You want your one shot to be magnificent. And you won't regret it. Because so many times I've made movies and I didn't put that extra 100% that needed it. And then, you regret it. You do regret it. You're like, wow, if I had just done a little bit further, I could have pulled the audience a little bit more. So I always encourage people, when they say they want to be filmmakers and writers, I almost chuckle because I'm like, well, are you ready to put thousands of hours into things and you know give up so many things? And I think the Kendrick brothers talked about that at their festival, like about the two guys that were becoming, college football players. One enjoyed their college life, and the other one, trained every morning, didn't get to go for ice cream, like didn't,
Yeah.
that's the life of a filmmaker, whether you want to accept it or not. People, you are dedicated to the craft. You have to be that good to have audiences you have to like just know your craft that well. It's unfortunately necessary. There's a lot of sacrifice with filmmaking, so I think Catholics and Christians are good for that industry because,
Right.
and that doesn't mean that every person that's a filmmaker sacrifices. They're just probably not very good filmmakers. You know what I mean? Like, you have to give a lot.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how, I mean, and if you love it, if it's kind of intriguing to you, then the giving, it doesn't feel so bad.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
So,
it's
like, with the key to the story, the reason I keep emphasizing story, like, if you've written a really good story, it's not difficult to get help. People come out of the woodwork, not because of
yeah,
you, and not because you can pay them, because you can't usually pay them. They're doing it because the story. You know what I mean? Like, they're getting up at 6 in the morning because they believe in the story. They want to see that
yeah,
story come to life. Like, your screenplay just inspires them. It's like a blueprint. It's like, this is really like neat. Do you think we could pull this off? And then the reason people work on your crew or put the hours in is because, can we do it? One of the things in my son's film, A Great Day, is the crucifixion of Christ. The makeup was like hard. It was hard. It took like, I want to say like 7 to 8 hours of like just sitting in front of like,
it looked good.
and then there was like 8 hours of shooting after that. You know what I mean? Like, it was just like,
Yeah,
it was an insurmountable task, but the artist who did the makeup was all in. She committed to making it real. If she had not done that, or we didn't spend the money to do that, the film would not have impacted the audience the way it did.
right.
And then, of course, there was the actor and the other actor, and there was a lot of other, but they were all like
Sure.
getting all those key. But why did she put that much hours into the makeup? She believed in the story. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
I could have got other makeup artists that would have just like plopped it on, and just like, I got to get out of here. I'm hungry.
right. Right.
She genuinely believed in the story. She thought like, okay,
Shit.
I could.
And she wanted to do it well.
She wanted to do it as well as she could, and if it took another 8 hours, she would have, like, that was her determination. I like to believe the story is what inspired her to do it.
Yeah, that's good.
So when you
It's a good story.
yeah, so when you're starting out with your films, the stories have to be good, not just because I say it's good, is because it's like that's what inspires everybody around to rally around you. They just love the story. And anytime I've gotten films produced is because people just love the story. They just wanted to see it played out that way.
There's I remember you saying, what is it that you want to say?
Yes, very key question.
Like as a starting point.
It's the absolute center of the entire reason why you're making the movie, the parable. So what does Jesus want to say to us? Right?
Yeah.
And he knows what he wants to say to us. He just like makes us digest it through a parable. So for a filmmaker, it's like, well, what do I want to say to the audience? And what's the story that's going to make that digestible? It's that simple.
Yeah. And like Jesus gives us the parable, and it's not necessarily completely understandable. Like at first.
Right.
So then they ask Jesus later, like, well, what did that mean? But they had to think about it.
Well, Jesus was very good because, like, and the problem with a lot of Catholic and Christian films is they're too obvious. They're just too obvious. Like, you Jesus understood the art of subtlety. He understood that the human existence, maybe it's because of our free will, our pride. It has to be subtle, and gentle. Maybe that's the most gentle way of getting an audience to reflect on their own selves rather than just like, you're evil or you're, this is wrong. Nobody wants to I mean, that's what's hurting the whole woke agenda. Is for years wokeism was always there, underneath everything. And what was interesting
Right.
about the past couple of years is woke came out like a drag queen. It came out like it came out of the closet, and everyone's like,
Right.
oh, I don't like being told, like I'm evil. You know what I mean? Because I think differently. I cherish my freedom to decide that myself. So back to Jesus, the way a parable is written is it lets you decide yourself. It doesn't say very black or white. So when people are saying, well, what does that mean? They're really reflecting like, well, what does it mean to me? What's great about a parable is it affects each person individually based on how they read it. A great movie does the same thing, does the same exact thing. It doesn't make it obvious. Like you're not going to get a speech at the end. You're not going to get a lecture. In fact, the less you say and the more you show, like Jesus's parables were very visually orientated, the more greater effect it will have on your audience.
So you got to get to a core truth that everyone is struggling with, in a sense.
Yeah, and it speaks to them. The film speaks to them without telling them or pointing fingers. It's just getting them to a place where they're self-evaluating. That's what the parables of Jesus did. They got the audience to a place where they're evaluating, am I living my life rightly?
What would you say about on the opposite end of the spectrum? I think sometimes people don't want to give them anything to reflect on, or they're scared to give them like a truth.
Right.
Like, so, you guys did some bold moves and a great day. And I don't know, what talk about that.
Well, then that's, your typical spectacle film, which does well at the box office. People just want to be like dazzled, there's nothing wrong with that, like those people get paid very well to dazzle and they dazzle. That's great,
circus and bread.
Yeah, it's like a big circus show. That's why I thought The Greatest Showman was such a good metaphor of what that is, the film business. It just dazzles, although The Greatest Showman like says a lot. There's a lot being said even.
And that's interesting because how it was received, like Hollywood seemed to like sort of like, they kind of poo-pooed it a little bit, but the audience was like, hey, we kind of like this message.
Yeah, it had a great message. But like, a lot of the like big spectacle films lately, like they're spectacle. They're visually very stimulating, but by the end of the week, you've kind of forgotten about it. Like, you won't remember it. You won't even remember the characters or what will really happen. But, like a movie like Rocky will never die. Rocky just hits the right emotional beats and moments that a movie needs to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll watch it over and over and you'll still feel that way.
Have you studied that movie at all?
Yeah, like, Rocky,
the writer.
Rocky is one of hands down underdog story. Just hits all the beats perfectly. Probably the highlight of Stallone's career as far as a writer. Probably he stumbled upon it because that was his life, metaphorically his life. Like, a nobody trying to be somebody, a washed up person trying to be somebody. So, I've studied that film. You know, I've studied a lot of films. Like when a film emotionally moves me, I will dissect it and figure out why it worked. And usually it boils down to the fundamentals. The filmmaker knew exactly how to convey it, or the editor.
Do you have a favorite film that does it for you, or
I'm trying to think,
or one of them?
I've always liked this film called Cinema Paradiso. It's a French film.
Okay.
I always thought that had an emotional impact for me because it had to do with film. But I would say like the strongest structured film that I like is ironically Star Wars. I think structurally
it's so simple.
It's so brilliant, and not just for the visual spectacle, but the storytelling is so solid. It literally follows the beats, and you literally every time watch that movie, experience it. There's just you couldn't even fix it. I mean, it's just there. Like there's nothing to add here.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
Yeah, there's other elements like that, but even the way the story, the life before, into the unknown world, and then the final battle, it's just like Lord of the Rings, just follows the beats just by the nose, and we love it every time we watch it.
Is it the simplicity of it?
Yeah, it is. I would say, like in my son's previous script, Saving Grace, it wasn't as simple as it was in A Great Day. And I think the reason Saving Grace failed to resonate with a reader was because it wasn't simple enough. And I think also when we got the story idea, one of my sons was very resistant to rewriting something. I said, it's simple, it's straightforward, it's going to work. So that might be the trick of why it's resonating. It's just simple.
So how do you know when you're simple enough?
Again, like it's all due to the way the audience responds to your writing. If they're excited about it and they feel it, it's simple enough.
So if the critique is coming back,
embrace critique. You'll know right away if you're really objective about it and don't take it personally. Critique is great. I mean, like, I gotta commend you, Brian, because like when we cut the film, when I cut my son's film, you liked the movie, but you said, at the ending scene, he should play more towards the photo on the wall. And it would mean reshooting that shot. But it was good critique. We wound up reshooting it because I valued your critique on it. And as much as that was difficult to reshoot that, it really made an impactful moment at the end of the movie, I think. I mean, I don't know. Did you like the reshoot? I mean, those were different shots at the end.
I'm trying to think of that scene, what that was.
That was the final scene where he's looking at the picture of Sister Grace. You were just you weren't like adamant about it. You're like, oh, it really would have been nice if he was playing it more towards the photo.
Yeah.
And I said, you're right. We didn't direct it that way, but embracing it, I think, had a bigger impact on the audience's response because that's like the last scene in the movie. So it was a subtle difference, but it made a huge difference in the performance.
Right.
It's and it was just, I think
it's kind of interesting how little things, what they do,
they make a difference. So I want to encourage writers to understand that the critique is actually a blessing.
It is a blessing, right? And then maybe I wonder if part of it leads to the idea that it's like, God wants us to make a movie because we're using our talents, but he really wants us to grow closer to him. And in a way, the critique helps us do that, just because it's humbling.
It is. It's frustrating, but in the end, if you start the way we look at it, like the way the Kendrick brothers looked at it, is that it was part of the process.
Yeah.
We don't take it personally.
Yeah.
It's not as painful if you don't take it personally. You're just like, oh, okay, they're helping me. They've made an effort to tell me what's specifically not working.
Right.
It's certainly a better attitude in the theater community where you're not supposed to critique anything. I mean, that's just a disaster. I mean, it's probably why
that seems very difficult.
Probably why theater is so terrible here in Mandarin. I mean, it's like nobody wants to, like, the artist isn't open. Like, it's just you're not gonna be successful. And it's not that you can't produce it, you can't make it, you'll do all that. But if you want to be successful with audiences responding to your material, you have to embrace their feelings and emotions and address it. You have to deliver. You have to deliver.
So would you say it's almost like you have to, in one sense, let your script die?
Yeah.
Like your idea, your idea has to be bigger than your story, or your purpose has to be bigger than your story.
Yeah, where you want to go has to be bigger than your story. Like, the story is a vehicle to get. So that's when you ask, like, well, what do you want to say, right? In the Maximilian Kolbe story, the film was about forgiveness. Like, what does that mean? Forgiveness is possible. Actually, what the point is, forgiveness is possible for anybody. That's what I want to say. Not because I say it, because God has already kind of said forgiveness is possible for everybody if we accept him. Now, originally, I wanted that said through Kolbe's perspective, but it wound up being the perspective of the Commandant of Auschwitz, and it wound up being a more powerful story because I was open to not worrying about the story. I was more worried about what I wanted the audience to feel.
Yeah.
And
that's good.
I'll quote a famous director, Alfred Hitchcock. He goes, movie making is about creating emotions and feelings. And Hitchcock said the moment they create a device where you can just stimulate those emotions and feelings, the filmmaking industry is over. Because that's all we do, is we deliver emotions and feelings. And that's why his films were always successful, because he understood that. He didn't fight that. He understood, I owe the audience a feeling and an emotion, and I'm committed to delivering those. He said films deliver emotions and feelings. And think about it, people go to movies specifically for that. They want to know.
So true.
They're not experiencing it in their everyday life, so they want to experience it. We're creatures.
Right.
Even Hitchcock understood that we're creatures and we want that fix. In my sense, I want to deliver a positive, spiritual, emotional feeling. It's my commitment as a filmmaker. And I'm willing to explore stories that can deliver. The key word is deliver that emotion, that feeling, that character transformation.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. What now? A Great Day, is it something people can see right now, or
they cannot? We're not posting it. We are setting up screenings. So if people are interested, we can direct you to screenings near you, or if God willing, you're inspired, we will have a screening at your parish. We'll be happy to get a copy, or if it's close enough, my sons would be happy to come and deliver it themselves. And we're finding with A Great Day that the theater experience is pivotal to the audience really feeling the film. Like, we're just blown away, like how much more the theater experience was. Like, it just shows you have an experience like the film. It just has to be in a theater.
Well, it's cool. Like, circling back to the idea of the Institute too. I think the theater thing is very important, and it's like that public display of our faith. It's a simple little witness, but people can do it,
right?
Just by going and watching your film, like going to a screening and watching it, just showing up and saying, I'm here to see a great day.
Right.
It's, and then the community comes together.
Right.
It's powerful. And then it's encouraging too, right? Because then you see you're not alone.
Yeah, I think it's just, so I think that's the way we're going to go about screening it. We have a screening coming up January 31st in Daytona at Embry-Riddle University. They've approved a screening there. We're hoping Assumption Church in Jacksonville hopefully will allow us to screen.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to get it screened around here or wherever, what do they need to do?
They can visit Mount Carmel Studios.
Okay. Is that a .com?
Yeah, that's a .com. MountCarmelStudios.com, or after Our Lady of Mount Carmel. That would be our contact information is there, and just reach out and we'll get back to you. We're very small, very tiny. Or they can go to my email, richfilm@yahoo.com. I'm happy to respond.
We can put a link. We can put a link in the description.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. And that would be a way, to help the cause and just kind of see good storytelling. And like I said, I'm 100% committed to helping other Catholic film writers develop their ability to write stories, because similar to the Kendrick brothers at the Christian World Film Festival is like, in order for us to have an impact on the culture, we have to have hundreds of these films, hundreds.
Yeah.
And then they can't stop it. So one filmmaker can't do it on their own. Like, if you want to impact the culture, it's unlikely.
We need hundreds.
But if you have hundreds of them, there's nothing they can do. Yeah. So we have to be committed to helping each other. So I'm committed 100%. Helping. I know a lot of people in the Institute are committed to that. So.
Yeah, that's awesome, Rich. And they can find you in the Institute.
Yes.
They can even message you or whatever.
I'm part of the Institute. Whatever I can do to help, I want people to succeed.
Yeah. Cool. It's been fantastic.
Yes, thank you.
Well done. I'm glad you've persevered in all your writing endeavors.
Well,
it's been a great joy to watch.
You helped me persevere. So thank you.
God's good, man. So you can find some links. You can check out where you can screen A Great Day. You can see that and the links in the description, and keep writing. Find it out what it is that you want to say, and go for it. And you can look at. I'll put Dr. Stan Williams, his blog in the description too. So that's always a great helpful tool in your writing. So remember, it's more important to live like you're in heaven than to make another film. And the next time I see you, I want to see Christ in you.